while pushing through the pain to be the best that I can be, and that's what magic is to me. As a magician, I try to create images that make people stop and think. I also try to challenge myself to do things that doctors say are not possible. I was buried alive in New York City in a coffin, buried alive in a coffin in April 1999 for a week. I lived there with nothing but water, and it ended up being so much fun that I decided I could pursue doing more of these things. The next one is I froze myself in a block of ice for 3 days and 3 nights in New York City. That one was way more difficult than I had expected. The one after that, I stood on top of a 100-foot pillar for 36 hours. I began to hallucinate so hard that the buildings that were behind me started to look like big animal heads. So next I went to London. In London I lived in a glass box for 44 days with nothing but water. It was for me one of the most difficult things I'd ever done, but it was also the most beautiful. There were so many skeptics, they started flying cheeseburgers on helicopters around my box to tempt me. My next pursuit was I wanted to see how long I could go without breathing, like how long I could survive with nothing, not even air. I didn't realize that it would become the most amazing journey of my life. As a young magician, I was obsessed with Houdini and his underwater challenges. So I began early on competing against the other kids, seeing how long I could stay underwater while they went up and down to breathe, 5 times while I stayed under on one breath. By the time I was a teenager, I was able to hold my breath for 3 minutes and 30 seconds. I would later find out that was Houdini's personal record. In 1987, I heard of a story about a boy that fell through ice and was trapped under a river. He was underneath not breathing for 45 minutes. When the rescue workers came, they resuscitated him and there was no brain damage. His core temperature had dropped to 77 degrees. As a magician, I think everything is possible. And I think if something is done by one person, it can be done by others. I started to think if the boy could survive without breathing for that long, there must be a way that I could do it. So I met with a top neurosurgeon, and I asked him, how long is it possible to go without breathing? Like, how long could I go without air? And he said to me that anything over 6 minutes, you have a serious risk of hypoxic brain damage. So I took that as a challenge, basically. My first try, I figured that I could do something similar, and I created a water tank, and I filled it with ice and freezing cold water, and I stayed inside of that water tank hoping my core temperature would start to drop. And I was shivering, and my first attempt to hold my breath, I couldn't even last a minute. So I realized that was completely not gonna work. So I went to talk to a doctor friend. How could I do that? I wanna hold my breath for a really long time. How could it be done? And he said, David, you're a magician. Create the illusion of not breathing, it'll be much easier. So he came up with this idea of creating a rebreather with a CO2 scrubber, which was basically a tube from Home Depot with balloons duct taped to it that he thought we could put inside of me and somehow would be able to circulate the air and rebreathe with this thing in me. This is a little hard to watch, but this is that attempt. So that clearly wasn't gonna work. Then I started thinking, would it be possible to hook up a heart-lung bypass machine and have a surgery where it was a tube going into my artery and then appear to not breathe while they were oxygenating my blood, which was another insane idea, obviously. Then I thought about the craziest idea of all the ideas. To actually do it, to actually try to hold my breath past the point that doctors would consider you brain dead. So I started researching into pearl divers, because they go down for 4 minutes on one breath. And when I was researching pearl divers, I found the world of free diving. It was the most amazing thing that I ever discovered, pretty much. There's many different aspects to free diving. There's depth records where people go as deep as they can, and then there's static apnea. That's holding your breath as long as you can in one place without moving. That was the one that I studied. The first thing that I learned is when you're holding your breath, you should never move at all. That wastes energy, and that I had to remain perfectly still and just relax and think that I wasn't in my body and just control that. And then I learned how to purge. Purging is basically hyperventilating. You blow in and out. You get lightheaded, you get tingling, and you're really ridding your body of CO2. So when you hold your breath, it's infinitely easier. Every morning, and this is for months, I would wake up and the first thing that I would do is I would hold my breath for, out of 52 minutes, I would hold my breath for 44 minutes. Breathe really hard for a minute, and then I would hold immediately after for 5.5 minutes. Then I would breathe again for a minute, purging as hard as I can, then immediately after I would hold again for 5.5 minutes. I would repeat this process 8 times in a row. Out of 52 minutes, you're only breathing for 8 minutes. At the end of that, you're completely fried. Your brain, you feel like you're walking around in a daze and you have these awful headaches. I started learning about the world record holder, and this guy is perfectly built for holding his breath. He's 6'4", he's 160 pounds, and his total lung capacity is twice the size of an average person. I'm 6'1" and fat. I had to drop 50 pounds in 3 months. So everything that I put into my body I considered as medicine. Every bit of food was exactly what it was for its nutritional value. I ate really small, controlled portions throughout the day, and I started to really adapt my body. The thinner I was, the longer I was able to hold my breath, and by eating so well and training so hard, my resting heart rate dropped to 38 beats per minute. In 4 months of training, I was able to hold my breath for over 7 minutes. I wanted to try holding my breath everywhere. I decided that I was going to break the world record live on primetime television. The world record was 8 minutes and 58 seconds. I entered the Sphere a week before the scheduled air date, and I thought everything seemed to be on track. 2 days before my big breath hold attempt for the record, the producers of my television special thought that just watching somebody holding their breath and almost drowning is too boring for television. So I had to add handcuffs while holding my breath to escape from. This was a critical mistake. Because of the movement, I was wasting oxygen, and by 7 minutes I had gone into these awful convulsions. By 7:08, I started to black out, and by 7 minutes and 30 seconds, they had to pull my body out and bring me back. I had failed on every level, so naturally, the only way out of the slump that I could think of was I decided to call Oprah. I told her that I wanted to up the ante and hold my breath longer than any human being ever had. This was a different record. This is a Puro 2 static apnea record that Guinness had set the world record at 13 minutes. In January of 2008, Oprah gave me 4 months to prepare and train. So I would sleep in a hypoxic tent every night. A hypoxic tent is a tent that simulates altitude at 15,000 feet, so it's like base camp Everest. Every morning again, after getting out of that tent, your brain is completely wiped out. My first attempt on Puro 2, I was able to go up to 15 minutes, so it was a pretty big success. The neurosurgeon pulled me out of the water because in his mind at 15 minutes, your brain is done, you're brain dead. So he pulled me up and I was fine. I then announced that I was going to go for Cetus's record publicly, and so he suddenly pushed the record up to 16 minutes and 32 seconds, which was 3 minutes longer than I had prepared. You know, it was longer than the record. So I started full focus. I completely trained to get my breath hold time up for what I needed to do, but there was no way to prepare for the live television aspect of it being on Oprah. In practice, I would do it face down, floating on the pool, but for TV, they wanted me to be upright so they could see my face, basically. The other problem was the suit was so buoyant that they had to strap my feet in to keep me from floating up. That made me extremely nervous, raising the heart rate. Then what they also did was, which we never did before, is there was a heart rate monitor. So every time my heart would beat, I'd hear the beep, 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 the ticking really loud, which is making me more nervous, and there's no way to slow my heart rate down. I spent the first 5 minutes underwater desperately trying to slow my heart rate down. I was just sitting there thinking, I've got to slow this down, I'm gonna fail, and I was getting more nervous, and the heart rate just kept going up and up all the way up to 150 beats. When I made it to the halfway mark at 8 minutes, I was 100% certain that I was not going to be able to make this. There was no way for me to do it. I kept pushing to 10 minutes. At 10 minutes, you start getting all these really strong tingling sensations in your fingers and toes. At 11 minutes, I started feeling throbbing sensations in my legs, and my lips started to feel really strange. At minute 12, I started to have ringing in my ears, and I started to feel my arm going numb. Then at 13 minutes, maybe because of the hypochondria, I started feeling pains all over my chest. It was awful. At 14 minutes, I had these awful contractions, like this urge to breathe. At 15 minutes, I was suffering major O2 deprivation to the heart. My heartbeat would go from 120 to 50 to 150 to 40 to 20 to 150 again. It would skip a beat, it would start, it would stop, and I felt all this. So at 16 minutes, what I did is I slid my feet out, because I knew that if I did go out, if I did have a heart attack, they'd have to jump into the body and take my feet out before pulling me up. So I was really nervous. So I let my feet out and I started floating to the top, and I didn't take my head out, but I was just floating there waiting for my heart to stop. And then suddenly I hear screaming, and I think that there's some weird thing, that I had died or something had happened. And then I realized that I had made it to 1632. So with the energy of everybody that was there, I decided to keep pushing, and I went to 17 minutes and 4 seconds. What I did immediately after is I went to Quest Labs and had them take every blood sample that they could to test for everything and to see where my levels were, so the doctors could use it once again. But I had the world record, and I wanted to make sure it was legitimate. As a magician, I try to show things to people that seem impossible. And I think magic, whether I'm holding my breath or shuffling a deck of cards, is pretty simple. It's practice, it's training, and it's practice, it's training, and experimenting while pushing through the pain to be the best that I can be. And that's what magic is to me. So thank you.
오늘은 인간의 한계를 도전하는 마술사 데이비드 블레인의 이야기를 소개해드렸습니다. 블레인은 17분 동안 숨참기 외에도 72시간 동안 얼음 속에 갇혀있기, 물탱크에서 7일 동안 버티기, 60시간 동안 거꾸로 매달려있기 등 인간의 한계를 넘어서는 수많은 도전을 했습니다. 마술을 할 당시 영향력이 얼마나 컸냐면 그 당시 조지 부시 대통령이 블레인의 마술을 언급하게 했다고도 하죠. 저는 이런 도전을 보면서 느낀 건 뭐든 진짜 죽어라 하면 할 수 있겠다 라는 생각이 들었어요. 사람이 생각보다 한계치가 없다는 걸 깨달았습니다. 불가능해 보이는 것도 이루는 방법은 동일하다고 생각해요. 보다 나은 연습과 훈련을 매 순간 이겨낸다면 그 결과는 아무도 모른다는 것을 말이죠. 여러분들은 어떻게 생각하시나요? 감사합니다.